So last time we talked, we had a business process analysis slides that we went through, and that was more on general process. So this one I wanted to focus a little more on requirements. It's really a fairly short and sweet set of slides. On our first slide here, over what's coming up. So the topics we'll go over is just an overview of requirements. We'll go through scope definition of requirements, the actual requirements process. We'll also go through interviews, talk about some deliverables, and what are the next steps at the end of the requirements phase. So first on overview, requirements gathering is a process for defining project objectives. So that's understanding what we're trying to do with this project. What are the goals of the project? Where are we trying to go? And and help align to a particular scope, which goes into the next bullet of clear identification of scope. So in a project, we do have throughout projects a lot of scope creep. So what we're trying to avoid and is getting outside of our scope guidelines. So we want to clearly define those up front to help make sure that we don't get any additional scope creep later on down the project. Process of gathering. So we're going to gather requirements, gather information around functional specs. What are the functional things that a business wants to do? Not necessarily the tools and technology associated to the business, but what are the functions that we're trying to work on? And one of those might be generalized, like accounting. One could be procurement. Another could be payment and AP. The list goes on and on. The next would be technical objectives. What are the technical things that we want to do? Not necessarily identifying at this point what technology to use. Not by a name brand or an existing tool, but more of what do we want to automate? Is there opportunity to automate? I want to automate invoicing when shipments complete. I want to automate this phone process or an IVR. Those are technical objectives. Doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to use AccuNet for this or use QuickBooks for that. Next sub-bullet here is on expansion. So expansion goals, where does the business want to go? A lot of times when you're gathering requirements, you want to understand what the goals of the business are going to be. Do you want to grow? Do you want to be more efficient? Do you want to expand your footprint? I think most people that sit with me in meetings with customers, I know Milligan's had this quite a bit lately. These are questions that I ask a lot of times when we're talking about doing a BPA project or job, because they become very important. Do I have an unlimited potential for doing requirements and tools and technology, or do we have constraints around what we have to work within? So defining future state environments. I know a lot of times when we talk about environments, we typically mean technology. There is a technological component of this, but not always. So we have to keep open-minded on the environments, and environments could be, for a shipping company, do we look at, different types of land? Do we look at, how we're doing our work? Do we have other vendors? Do we have other processes in place that we have to work at in different environments? Could be physical, could be technological. Last bullet here is around constraints of the environment of the organization. So what constraints, what rails do I have on my left or right or in front of me that we have to stay within? Could be a budget, it could be a geography, could be a technology. The technology in general right now with organizations, you want to stay outside of the Apple area because it doesn't play well in the general organizations across multiple platforms. So you want to keep that as a potential constraint, because that may limit your technology, may limit how you interact with a customer using a competing technology and getting that to work right. So that's our overview. Going on to our next slide on scope definition. These are a series of bullets that I started to come up with when talking about scope. So scope is a is a way that we can identify what are the boundaries we're trying to work within. And a lot of those do go hand in hand. You talk about if folks here understand the project management, rule of three with the three main constraints, it's time, resources, and budget. If one of those doesn't align with the other, then you're not going to have a successful project 90% of the time. So being able to balance those three items. So the scope, we will go through with a customer and talking through what are their goals. Goals I like to go through early on. Those goals will help identify what are the constraints that we're going to have to work with, could tell us what kind of budget we might be working with, could single out a market that the company wants to work with, or it could even just blow everything out of the water and make it more difficult. But the point is to make sure that we identify that up front. Two is deliverables. So scope on deliverables, typically in a requirements process, you're going to go through an analysis. You're going to look at various deliverables that we'll get into on slide 7. But the biggest part of that is going through what are my functional requirements, what are my technical requirements, possibly even getting into functional specifications and technical specifications, current state processes, potential future state processes and workflows, and going from there. Number 3 is around features. Features of a process or features of a technology. Typically, features do relate specifically to a technology, which would be around printing, scanning, could be around defining what buttons we're going to use, what are those parameters on buttons, and so forth. Typically, that will get into number 4, which is on functions. So features and functions kind of go hand in hand. A feature might be a button, but the function might actually be, okay, well, I have that button, but that button performs an action, which is then a function of a tool. It might be printing to PDF or printing a copy of a PDF to a shared drive or a storage drive. 5 is around tasks. So tasks are workflow related up front. So a lot of times we're going through as is or current state processes. What are those tasks we're trying to achieve? Those tasks could be, doing invoicing. Well, invoicing is I consider that a category. You're going to have different tasks underneath that category that will then tell you, I need to start with step 1, step 2, step 3. Each of those steps are tasks. Defining those is key upfront requirements because you're going to use those as opportunities to create efficiencies or to have a technical requirement or a technical spec that will then alleviate some of the pain or some of the manual processes that you currently find. And then 6, to go through in project scope or deadlines. What are, I talk about the rails and scope. Deadlines do in fact come into play very heavily. So if you have deadlines that we're trying to meet that are way too short and unrealistic, then the approach then might be taking a project into a multiple phased type project where you may dwindle down your scope. That scope would then allow you to meet that original deadline and then have another scope that would go beyond that deadline. What are the pieces and the give and take of a project? What are those? And defining that with the deadlines with a customer. And then 7, around cost and budget. That always comes into play with any customer. What are the costs I'm looking at? What is my budget to work with in order to get this requirements done or to get this overall project done? And then based on the cost, budget, and scope, how can we come up with an effective planning session in the next phase after scoping your requirements? Next slide is going over requirements process. I have this nice little slide on the right or picture on the right showing a high-level overview of going through requirements. So requirements phase looks over current state process initially, identifying the different tasks, the processes and workflows, of course, technology, and understanding how does it currently get facilitated, any of these. Okay, well, somebody creates a manual work order that then gets typed by resource B into a tool or system like SL or Acumatica, and then there's all these other processes that happen afterwards. So during requirements, we're gonna put together those tasks and processes and workflows together and put it on paper, so that we can have a nice collaborative session with the client to say, is this required? Is this needed? Could we automate this? We can answer the automation. We can help answer what is a future state and how a tool might accommodate that. But we want to make sure that we're in agreement with the customer at that point on trying to do that. Along with processes, tasks, and workflows and technology, we also want to look on the left side of this graphic, which are more specific into those items, which are business requirements. Why are we doing this process? What are we doing with this process, and what data are we capturing? Another might be user requirements. Okay, well, a user could be somebody within the organization. We can also have a user external to the system or organization. How do we actually get them to use the system, and what is that requirement? Then the next one there is around system requirements. System requirements, it depends on the organization. You might have a basic ordering company who does manufacturing, so fairly simple and low complexity, versus a higher end type company who does drafting, for example, is a difficult one, because the size of graphs and size of images are on the high side. They weigh higher on the scale of needing a higher or more sophisticated system to help facilitate those pieces and parts. So that the idea is that we're working from a high level, working down into a detail level with each of these pieces and parts, and that is by going through a business requirement, user requirement, and system requirement. Does anybody have any questions on this? All right. Next one, interview process. So interview processes and requirements are, obviously they're critical. You may have, a client may have a process documented on a workflow diagram, like in Visio or PowerPoint, but that doesn't tell you every piece and part of the process. Really by talking to individuals who interact with the process or key resources in those processes, we're gonna get a chance to understand what works, what doesn't work. We're gonna help document that through those interviews. We hold those interviews with key resources. It might be a person that works directly in that process, or it might be a cog in the wheel, so to speak, on that process. Somebody that gets handed off or gets handed to a piece of the puzzle. Another key area here in interview process is making sure that you're interviewing at different levels on the same process. The reason why is somebody who's entrenched in the weeds of a particular process, may have something really valuable to say, or may have something disgruntled to say, but that opinion doesn't always match the person who put it in place or who designed it, who was typically a manager or an executive who designed it and put it in place. Understanding those different vantage points allows us to really find a compromise to where we're actually hitting a double-edged sword to make this process a more valuable exercise for the organization, because we want to put something in place that's going to satisfy the individual contributor doing the process, and also the managerial or executive level who supports that process. Next one here is around those different resources at different levels. You're going to find that they may have additional requirements, they may have less or fewer requirements. Plus, each of them are going to have different ideas. Their different vantage points could lead us to may trigger a thought to documenting a future state process that takes out half the steps. And that might be by a requirement that really wasn't needed, or nobody can justify having a tool in place, where we might be able to consolidate multiple things with one or with fewer. Let's see, next item here I have on the list are leadership interviews. They actually do lead to a more long-term goal and objectives to the organization. That is key to me when I'm talking to leaders in an organization, because that validates what I'm going to put together in a requirements and future state design. I want to understand what those goals are. Those help give me an idea of constraints. Those constraints may not even exist, so I like to poke and probe some additional questions that could help dwindle that scope into what I can help provide. I already talked about the next one, which is around the individual contributors. But the last bullet here is really, as we go through the process of requirements, we want to come back. We actually want to go back through and verify that our process, our current state, our future state, actually align with the company goals or align with an executive's goals. The reason why is, I don't know how many people I've worked with over the past. You get into, it's a difference between a waterfall project and an agile project, where a waterfall project, you're going to be given requirements and you're going to build a product. You're going to deliver that product with a certain level of testing. But by the time you get to testing and implementation, much of what you've built is does not align to what that business expected. Versus agile, you're going to do use cases based on each scenario. And each scenario could be a screen, could be a button, could be whatever it is. You're going to, throughout the project, build and test each of those use cases and verify with the customer. Then at the end, you're going to compile those requirements and compile those development efforts to a final product that then gets signed off. When that final product gets signed off, you've got much smoother buy-in from a customer of what they signed up for and what was delivered, because they saw the product throughout the process. And that's essentially what we're doing here with requirements. We want to go back and validate and show to the client that we in fact have aligned to their goals. All right, next slide is deliverables. So I kind of talked through deliverables already, but just wanted to put these down at least on a slide for folks to capture later. First and foremost, we need to capture current state processes. So we build those through workflows, Visio diagrams, PowerPoint workflows. We want to identify what are those key pieces and parts, technology, handoffs, manual processes. That's where the mapping technology to process comes into play. With that, we do have manual processes which don't go to technology. So we do document those as well in our workflows. The middle one here is around corporate goals documented. This is one of those things where it's like building a mission statement for an organization. You build a mission statement, you want to stick to it. That's why companies put the mission statement on their screensavers, or put it at the front door, or put it where people can see it consistently. We want to make sure that that's clear to them. That's what they signed up for, and this is why we're doing this. Next to the last bullet is future state. So documenting future state, what it should look like is a part of requirements. It is the key step or I should say the key document for the next step. And the next step naturally in the project is design. So we want to make sure that future state is pretty solidified because it is the next input for design, which goes into the last bullet here, which is planning for design, is also a deliverable. What does that project for design look like? From a scope, from deliverables, from resources. We want to put that together as an end deliverable for the requirements phase with a customer. And of course, we as AccuNet want to facilitate. We want to be that partner to do the design with them, being that we've helped identify what their goals are, what their current state to future state mappings are going to be. So we have an intricate knowledge of that information specific to that customer that we can help facilitate that. And then the last slide I have on here is a little bit redundant, but next steps. We always want to leave a customer at the end with a review of the requirements so that they know they have it. Where is it? They can always go to it. We always want to plan for the remainder of the project, and what I mean by that is getting into the next bullet, which is design. And then what's after that? After design is going to be development and implementation. And then even beyond that, ongoing support. We want to make sure that that customer, that partner of ours, understands that we don't want to just deliver a project or deliver a product. We want to be that partner for ongoing support. We're running across more than one company now that we have worked with in the past, where we've built a system or tool years ago, and they see that we've helped them throughout the years in supporting that, and that's gone a long way. That's a way that we can help retain customers and help improve reputation and help get additional leads as a result. So with that, those are my slides. Does anybody have any questions?
So once we have one of these projects underway,
yeah,
are we going to be able, I think it'd be good for us to go over as a group, as these steps or requirements are actually created, we could go over those as a group so we have an understanding of how those are written. For me, I know a lot of us have done that, but that's probably my requirements gathering is probably where I need the most help. So for me, that would be helpful,
Yeah, so for all of these, we want to make sure that we have templates. The first couple of projects, we're going to have certain templates that we're going to start using and defining, and those will be reusable for additional projects down the road.
Yeah, and like we just, said, nothing like having a live project to learn with, and learn from.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of a hands-on learner. So for me, that's when I learn the best.
Uh-huh. What other questions? Nothing?
Could you go back to slide 5 for a second?
Sure.
Okay. So the way I kind of look at this is when you're meeting with someone, you identify whether their requirement is a business, a user, or a system requirement, and then that categorizes that. But then you also look if it's a need, a want, and then you would prioritize them.
Correct.
And then you would get deep into the tasks and the process and the workflow. Is that kind of how it would work? Okay.
Yep. Yeah, and a lot of times these are done through. So I like using Agile for these. Kind of just getting right into the use case itself. So if there was a process, and of course we've got to enter customer data. Okay, well that's a need. I've got to be able to do it, right? But can I, is there an automated way to get that customer's information? That would be a want. But the use case itself would be, I need to enter, customer data into a particular screen. And then based on those, we can prioritize, which is doable. And prioritization does change as you get into a future state. Is it a feasible option to automate finding a customer's information? That's a pretty hard task to do, and will require other integrations that would cost more money. You go down that rabbit hole on the automation side of it, and it's the prioritization goes pretty much to the bottom of the barrel.
And then one thing you didn't kind of mention, but I guess it goes without saying, that not only does this requirements process is also with the reporting requirements. So that would be another area, completely under, you know, entering customers or paying bills or whatever, right? So like
Yep.
a lot of times reporting requirements get overlooked.
They do.
I know for me, I forget to ask a lot of that question. So,
yeah, if it's within scope, it definitely needs to be captured here in requirements. Yeah, that's always going to be the important question when you get into requirements is on the reporting side. You know, how deep, because that'll change, that'll push the project timelines for sure. Once you add a certain amount of reporting requirements, if you're looking at, you know, I've always been in the banking world and financial world where you have, you know, regulatory requirements. You have a statutory view versus a internal business view, or most of them call managed view. Being able to manage those two different views. Your chart of accounts still is the same, and some of your other you know, other types of reference data could be similar or the same, but your hierarchies could be different. Your reporting requirement, your sales hierarchy is going to be different than your regulatory reporting. So, you know, having to identify that up front is going to be very important.
yeah, because I know for me, when we're implementing, it's one of the things you don't think about asking about is the reporting, because there's so many custom reports or so many reports already in the accounting system that were already chosen. So this is different than your project. But what I'm saying is, when we do an implementation, we've already done the gathering of the requirements. But one of the things we don't always, I notice in a lot of our RFPs, it doesn't have stuff about reporting as much. And so I could see where we need to ask that question more, because especially when you're not thinking about what system they want to go with. This is a blank slate, like anything goes. So we want to make sure that the system they want either has the reports they're going to need, or it's easy to modify and make reports the way they want them. Right? So, yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
That makes sense. I'm having to look at this a whole different way, because I'm thinking outside the box. Like, we always think Excel, Acumatica, D365, whatever.
Right.
We're not thinking there's more to the world than those three things. So it opens up a world to like other ideas.
Yeah, I mean, you could end up, you know, looking at as we start to get into some of these requirements, and you get into let's say you're working with a wholesaler on, you know, wholesaling through manufacturers or even vendors, however you want to look at it. You may find that, you know, why are you working with 10 different people who are making the same product? Why, you know, what value do you have in that? And being able to measure it would be a reporting requirement. And I think an opportunity not only to build a report, but also for the company to, you know, streamline who they're working with and who they value the relationship with, which could get them into better pricing, could get them into, you know, creating competition between those manufacturers, could lead into a whole different slew of things that that you wouldn't normally think of just in implementing SL or Acumatica.